Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Leadership and Strategic Management. I am Bill, the company's expert. Thank you for joining me today. Today, we are going to be talking about required skills for executive managers. See, I knew that. I had to look up on my notes there. But if you are interested in possibly climbing the ladder, possibly moving up into upper management in any industry, in any size of company, that's what we're going to be talking about today. What are some of the things that you need to do that? And specifically, a big part of that is learning a lot of soft skills. So we're going to be spending a lot of time on that today because surprisingly, this is kind of the make or break type thing when it comes to this stuff. There are a lot of qualified people. If you've been working in a career in an industry for a very long time, you probably know that there are a lot of people who could be the boss, right? They might be different. They might have different personalities, different backgrounds, different core competencies, different ways of doing things, different work styles, different communication styles, that kind of thing. But they could do it, right? Now, that's a fact of life. You have a lot of people out there who are technically qualified. So how do you distinguish between them? And that's what we're talking about. This is something that's been a bit of a fascination of mine for about 20 years. So I thought we would talk about it because I got the feeling that a lot of people are interested also. So that's what we're going to be getting into. Just some public service announcements. Thank you for being here. First of all, this is a live stream. So I'm going to talk about this stuff, but it's also a chat, so there is a chance for you to ask me a question if you are wondering something or you are struggling with something. That's what we're going to talk about. However, this is more about leadership as opposed to, how do I get a job? So just bear that in mind. I want to thank my Patreons, my channel members, and all of you for being here. You guys are awesome. Yes, and you are doubly awesome because we're all about self-improvement here. This is why we're doing this. Okay, if you want to improve yourself or realize your ambition, it's good to learn about it. So let's go. Okay, so the topic of today's chat is required skills for executive managers. I'm going to alternate between a couple of different cameras I have here. Those are my notes, so you see what I'm going to get into. But I'm going to try and do this as I talk, so this is always fun. Required skills for executive managers. Now, some of the things here you could probably guess. If you want to be the boss, or if you want to be in a position of, I hate to say leadership, but you're going to be in a position of people management. This is where the stuff is important. And even if you are in an area like operations, right? Operations, I like operations. I've come up through operations. Operations is filled with a lot of introverts because you usually don't deal with a lot of customers if you're in operations. So the people that tend to outperform in that area and tend to rise up are people that have a lot of technical skills, a lot of attention to detail. And this is great, and you might be one of those people, but invariably, as you reach a certain level, you have to deal with people. That's just the reality of it. And the people who learn this and realize this sooner, all things being equal, tend to do better. Okay? Because when you think about the world, when you think about business, okay, the reason business can operate is because people are connected. Okay? For example, if you're selling a product, you have to convince customers to buy your product, right? So you have to deal with customers. You have to communicate with them. You have to interact with them. You have to learn how they think and learn who they are and all this kind of stuff if you expect them to behave in the way that you want them to. The behavior could be you simply want them to buy your product or buy your services, right? That's the most obvious example. Other examples are, usually you can't do a business venture alone. You need other people, other partners. Okay, for one, you need employees. And then outside of your organization, you need suppliers, vendors. You need some type of regulator, if it's the government or some outside body, to give you permission to do what you're doing or to assist you and do what you're doing. You need the help of other people or other entities to to help you in your marketing efforts and help get the word out that you exist and, you know, that you're legitimate and all this kind of stuff. So you are constantly interoperating with other people. And if you can do this more effectively, then you will be more effective. That's the rule. So a lot of people that I've interacted with over the years, a lot of introverts in operations and things like this, you know, some people don't realize this, and that's fine. But if your goal is to sort of climb the ladder and get into a leadership position, then, you know, the page 1, chapter 1, paragraph 1 is understanding this. So the number one thing is to develop our social skills. And I see that there's 20 people here. So thank you for being here. You guys are awesome. Yes. Okay. So let's talk about what that actually means, interpersonal skills. Now I've written down some notes here for myself, but the obvious thing is how to communicate with somebody, how to make yourself clear. And on the surface, this seems kind of simple. You just say what you mean, say what you want, give directives, make a request, that kind of thing, make a report, and people receive it. Yeah, okay. On the surface, that seems simple. In reality, it's a lot more complicated. In reality, we come up against the fact that people are emotional beings with egos, right? And while we can talk at somebody, that doesn't mean that they're A, going to listen, and B, going to do what we say, right? So this is what I mean by communication skills. It's going one step beyond simply saying what we want or saying what we need or saying our opinion. It's how do you get people to respond? How do you get people to, first of all, stay and listen, right? And then secondly, exert effort on their part to actually fulfill your request or help you in some way, right? That's what I really mean by communication skills. When people talk about communication skills at high level, that's what they mean. It's not about how to say something. It's about how to get the other person to respond. So that's what we're talking about, really, and that's a skill that you need. For example, if you were the boss, if you were a manager and you managed people or projects or money or assets or whatever you're managing, but anyone who ever has to deal with you doesn't like it, right? They think that you're an idiot. They think that you're a jerk. They hate dealing with you. They find you very off-putting. They disagree with you on pretty much everything. They find you rude. They find that you're not interested in them, so therefore they're less interested in dealing with you. If that's your effect on everyone you encounter, obviously your results are going to be rather poor, right? So being able to have the opposite effect on people is something that really sets an individual apart as someone who could possibly be in charge, because that's a lot of what you're required to do. Okay, there are 18 people. I lost a couple of people. Yes, get in the chat. If you are interested in a certain specific thing, let me know, and I can try and speak to that. Otherwise, I'm going to be going through my version of this. This is based on partly some of the theory, right? So if you go to a business school, or even, I'm not sure, if you study to be a diplomat, you may learn some of this. If you study political science, I'm not sure, maybe you might learn some of this too. You know, they're all fields that require very high level personal interaction skills and communication skills. Like diplomacy, for example, is, my understanding is it's a study of, you know, how to maintain cordial relations. Like how do you maintain a good relation with someone where you both know that you fundamentally disagree on a lot of issues, right? That's my understanding of what diplomacy is. I'm not a diplomat. I've never taken diplomacy, but I've had a fascination with it because that's the stuff you learn. And knowing those skills, they could really be handy in a business career, let me tell you. It ties very closely, as I understand, to what we're talking about here today. Okay, so the goal for you, if you are interested in being a manager, being someone who's in charge of people, is going to be having that effect on others, okay? You don't want to be off-putting. You want everyone who deals with you to enjoy dealing with you, and you want them to think of you as a good, pleasant person that They are going to enjoy the interaction, and they are not going to find any of it disappointing, right? Even if you disagree, even if they make a request and you can't grant it, or you choose not to grant it, they won't go away upset, hating your guts, right? That's a big skill. And when we're young, all things being equal, we tend to have that less. And as we get older, generally speaking, we tend to develop that more. There's always exceptions, and people are starting from different places, but that's generally how it goes. So first of all, understanding that this is a goal you should have, and this is something you should aim towards, is kind of part of the big part of the battle. A lot of people don't even realize that this is something they should be doing. I started out supervising tradespeople many years ago, and the average age of these people was 50 years old, something like that, and I was in my 20s. Wonderful situation, but in that environment, at least my experiences were, a lot of people, they just did not have any of this on the horizon. They didn't realize that this was a thing. So you'd go up to somebody, you'd keep it real, you'd be very gruff. If you wanted to make a request, the way to have some force behind the request was to yell and slam your fist down on your desk or their desk. That was kind of the way you did it. I mean, it's complete polar opposite to the way things actually get done in the real world, how things are actually effectively done. Believe me, I get it. And that's where that was my first model of how to do this. And it was completely 180 degrees the opposite of what the reality is. Okay. So you need to shoot to have an effect on people where they want to deal with you. They enjoy dealing with you. Even if the answer is no, they still enjoy dealing with you. Okay. They don't feel that you're being a jerk. So for example, if you have to say no to somebody, you give a detailed explanation, you explain your side of it, and you do it in such a way that they go away thinking, that makes sense, right? I can see that this person is reasonable. They're on my side, and I understand their side of it, and I understand why they can't. It's not that they don't want to, it's that they can't, for example. So even though I came to them with a request and they did not grant my request, I still don't have a problem with them, right? That's the goal. Imagine if every person you said no to, they went away hating you, not wanting to deal with you ever again. Well, it'll only be a matter of time before you have that effect on every single person you interact with, because sooner or later, you got to say no to somebody, right? It's very easy to maintain a great relationship when, you can just grant them everything that they want, right? It's a little bit harder when you can't, right? That's where the challenge is. So that's the first kind of step, okay? So understanding that, and a big part of this is protocol, understanding how to be polite, like manners, okay? This is stuff that really does matter. The purpose of manners originally, was to make people feel better about you and have a civilized encounter, right? And then later it turned into something else. It turned into making people feel at ease and happy that you were there, right? We don't do it simply because of tradition. We do it because we want to have that effect on other people. That was the original purpose of it. And, so it's a great skill to develop. Even in modern times, where certainly in some segments of society, it seems that is kind of eroding a little bit, right? It's still a thing among people that, are in charge of stuff and people, right? And for good reason. So anything you can do there to develop those skills in yourself will go a long way. Okay, that's the first thing. If you do not have those, it doesn't matter how much technical skills you have most of the time. It's a deal breaker because they don't want to put you in charge, because if everyone who has to deal with you goes away hating you, never wanting to deal with you again, it's a showstopper. It's a deal breaker, right? So that allows you to be a contender if you've got this stuff down. Okay, that's the first thing I would say. Interpersonal skills. Okay, hopefully my chat and stuff is working. I get a little worried when I don't get anything in the chat for a while, because Once again, I'm using Streamlabs OBS to do these live streams, and every once in a while they break their own product with an update, with a security update or a feature update that breaks a lot of their functionality, and they don't ever admit it. And then you wait a couple weeks, and then usually they release an update that fixes things again. I've noticed that behavior. So they've broken things a couple of weeks ago. It's still broken. I don't show anyone in the chat on my screen up here. And I don't show the view count or anything like that. I'm just waiting for them to fix it, but usually I still get stuff. So if you can hear me and see me, say something in the chat, then I can verify that that still works. Okay, second thing, beyond interpersonal skills that will enable you to be a contender for upper management positions, executive management positions, if that's what you're going for, okay? But beyond that, it'll also help you be more successful. Even if you're an entrepreneur, you're not trying to necessarily impress anybody. You are trying to be more effective in your role of running a business operation, right? And that's image skills, okay? I don't think that's an actual term. I'm just calling it that. But basically, it's projecting a positive image of not just yourself, but the organization. That's something that is very important. I see Serious Cat is here. It says, chat is working. Excellent. Thank you very much, Serious Cat. You are indeed serious, and I can always rely on you. Is that a picture of a dog? It's too small to tell. I'm looking at this tiny thing. It almost looks like a vole or something. Anyway, okay, but never mind about that for now. Okay, so projecting a positive image. This is something that can be quite annoying if it's done poorly, but it is real, and it's something that you will be required to do if you're wanting to do this stuff, if you're wanting to, be a general manager or something like that. My first career job, I worked for, people usually don't say what company they work. I'm just going to say I worked for GE, General Electric. And once again, this was the supervisor thing that I talked about a moment ago. And, as a supervisor, you were required to be the agent of upper management. So if upper management decided they were going to do something, here's a new policy, here's a new announcement, you're the one that had to read that to the workers, right? The tradespeople. And, you supervised a gang of tradespeople. And, a lot of the stuff that they would come out with, I felt at the time, just my opinion, I felt it was pretty poorly communicated. It was poorly phrased, and it annoyed people when you read out the new announcements. Okay, they've decided that there's a new rule from now on. This is going to be the rule, and it's like, I thought it was stupid. The workers thought it was stupid. People had a problem with it. And so what I ended up doing at age 25 or whatever I was saying, like, this is what they are saying. They're saying this. It wasn't we are saying this. It was they are saying this. And I remember being taken aside and given a bit of a reprimand by one of my peers and saying, who told me, you need to say, we have come up with a new rule, not they, because you are management, whether you like it or not. You are management. You're one of us, right? And I remember thinking, like, God, I'm in hell. This is stupid. You have to support things that you don't agree with. Now, that's part of it. But at the same time, this endeared me to some of the workers because it felt like I was one of them instead of one of, I was one of us rather than one of them. I was one of the workers rather than one of the managers. But but the thing is, you can't project an image of like, oh, what a dumb company we work for. They've got it wrong again. They're coming out with a new initiative. They'll probably screw it up. You can't do that, right? Because that is frowned upon by management. If you are management and you see one of your supervisors doing this, you're going to get upset. You're going to think like, why are you throwing us under the bus like this? There's actually a reason behind what we're asking people to do, and you're not supporting us. You're not on my side. You don't have my back, right? So it was that shift in attitude that that is required. Now, listen, sometimes you just can't support anything. There's a lot of bad management out in the world and a lot of countless examples of it. People that are dumb, people that don't understand what's important, people that are running their companies into the ground, or their organizations, if it's a nonprofit or government or something. They're doing a terrible job, and you can't just get behind anything. But you have to try, if you're wanting to get promoted and be seen like that. They will not put somebody in charge who actively despises the organization and what it's trying to do and how it's run. It just doesn't work like that. In the same way that you wouldn't invite a friend over to your house to be your close friend to do something fun with, if they kept bad-mouthing you behind your back constantly, right? It's the same kind of feeling. So you need that correct attitude. Now, some situations, you just can't summon up that attitude because it's just so repugnant to you. And that's fine. And everybody's got to follow their bliss, I'm not a lawyer. Lawyers are people that I think one of the requirements is you have to be able to argue whatever position based on who's paying you, right? So, some people are okay with that. Some people, they can sort of flip a switch and become almost like an agent of somebody else and not have any moral issues with it. Other people can't. I'm very much in the latter, and I've done that throughout my career. But if you do get into a situation where the management isn't that bad, they're doing okay, they're somewhat reasonable, then my point is that you have to be able to support them publicly. You have to support them to stakeholders. Have you heard of that word, stakeholder? It means anyone who has a stake in the company. That means it could be an employee, it could be a customer, it could be a member of the general public. They just walk by, and your facility is in their community, and so they're involved. They're a stakeholder, right? That's what that means. You have to represent your organization favorably to everybody, to the public, to workers, to customers, everybody. Okay, that's part of it. It's very hard to be seriously considered for an executive management role or an upper level management role if you just don't have that attitude in place, right? You're publicly criticizing them, you're publicly showing or demonstrating that you don't believe in what they're doing or what they're saying. That's going to cause major issues. That's something that you have to get under control. Let's see. Okay, in the chat, we got a couple of things here. Do you have any tips on how to get hired if you're disabled? No matter how much I try, they hire an able-bodied person. I'm just as competent, if not more competent. I just can't convince recruiters. That's a little outside the scope of this particular live stream. We're talking about upper management, but the short answer is networking, okay? Networking is the great equalizer, and it's networking on demand. So what you do is you reach out to managers, executives, people like this ahead of time. You don't wait till they post a job. You go to a company that you want to work for, you contact them. LinkedIn is a great channel to do this. And you say, I'd very much like to, you could do many things, right? I've talked about this countless times. You could say, hey, I'm here. I'm great at this. If ever you're looking, let me know. Or you could say, I'd like an informational interview. Could you possibly spare me 30 minutes of your time? I'd very much like to get your expert opinion on something, on this industry and where it's going, right? Things like this. You meet them. Once they see that you're awesome, you're interested, they don't mind that you're disabled if it's for, a job that you could do, right? Okay, so that's the short answer. I've done so many videos and live streams about that. Check out some of my other stuff. I talk about that extensively. Okay, Edgar says, good morning. I'm a Hispanic person. I work hard. My English is not the best. I got a promotion. Now I'm in office. How can I manage work with other, even if my English is not perfect, I'm still studying English and I'm skillfully in computer programs. Like how can you, what's the question? how can I manage work with others? Like, how can you be a manager with you need to have the primary language that you operate in. It has to be above a certain level. Like, there's a certain hurdle you just have to have. So if that's a roadblock for you, all I can say is just keep working at it. You're not doing too bad, but you need to be able to I'm just going off what you've written here. You need to be able to put a sentence together and this kind of thing. Now, listen, if it's any help, okay, I have this right here. I have a writing course, okay, that talks about language and how to write. And it's mainly about written communication, but it's how to write as an executive, okay? So how you communicate, how you persuade people, how you, like, what the protocol is for some things. Okay, so check that out if that's of any use to you. I don't know if you want to go that route, but if you do, I have a great resource that was created for people that are wanting to learn how to communicate as an executive or as a manager. Okay, so it does the first part of the course. There's 3 modules. The first module goes into like the mechanics of writing and how you do it properly and all this kind of stuff. Okay, it's quite a bit different from the what they call it, IELTS, like the learning English as a second language. This is completely different. This is English for business. It's a different thing completely. Mickey9, hello Bill. I'm a bit late, but I'm here again. Nice to see you, and you, Mickey9. Thank you for joining me. Sorry, I just joined the stream. I will check your other stuff. Thank you for answering my question. I've been trying to network, but I gotta up my game for sure. Just revamping. Now listen. Helmina, if that's how you say her name, in the description box of this video, I put some links to other videos I've done, okay, that are resources. One of them is called How Successful People Get Hired. Okay, so if you look in the description box, there's a link to a video I did called that. Watch that video. That might give you an idea of the types of things that you can do to elevate yourself above the crowd. And this goes for anyone who is suffering from some kind of non-standard thing. So if you're disabled, or if you've got a work gap, or if you're changing careers, like anything like that, okay? Maybe you've had to quit work to go take care of a sick family member or something like that. So anyone in any of those situations, this is the great equalizer that will help you to overcome whatever that issue is, okay? So check that out. Okay, so let's get back into it. We're talking about required skills for executive managers. So far, we've talked about interpersonal skills, and we've talked about image skills, or what I'm calling image skills, which is representing yourself and your organization in a positive light to all stakeholders. That means employees, customers, the general public, everybody. Okay, we've talked about that. Now, something else that I want to add in, okay? And this is not taught as part of like business programs. I've never encountered a business program or anything in an MBA or anything like that that talks about this. Okay, the closest thing is organizational theory, which talks about how people how they interoperate in an organization. Okay, it's the closest thing, but they don't talk about this. It's something I call being politically aware. Okay, it's a form of power politics, because if you've spent any time working in almost any industry, you know that there's a lot of office politics that happen, right? And if you study business, if you take a business program, there's all kinds of different things you learn, like you learn marketing and accounting and all these different things. But one area is called organizational theory that I just mentioned, and that's where they start to go into this stuff. Because you may notice that a lot of people behave in a really weird, borderline stupid way in organizations. And you might think, why do people behave like this? It doesn't make any sense. It's dumb. It's ineffective, right? People are so inefficient when you put them together, right? One of the goals of management is to try and fight against that and get people working together. The problem is you've got people that have egos and opinions, and trying to get them to pull together is very hard. A lot of people just don't agree on a lot of different things, and they've got differing opinions and different work styles and different communication styles. right? So office politics, for want of a better word, is one of those things, a power dynamic, okay? Now, you could talk about this for, forever. You could really get into this. It's a huge topic, but I just want to say one thing about it, and that is, okay, office politics is, there's one element that you absolutely need to know if you want to move into management or executive management, and that is, it's this dilemma where you need to know when to support your boss and when to keep it real and be honest, right? Obviously, if you go too far to either extreme, it's going to be bad. On the one hand, if you are honest and you keep it real all the time, you tell everyone exactly what you think of them and exactly, what your true opinion is about everything. And you just are brutally honest about everything. This is what's going on. Let me tell you, here's the lowdown. And obviously, if you did that in every situation, it would be bad for you. Okay? You need to be, for one, you need to keep things like confidentiality, right? You can't just blab and spill the beans on everything to anyone who will listen, right? Also, some of your opinions may not be popular with every person, right? We all know this because we live in the world. So if you keep it real to everyone all the time and just give full and complete information in a very, direct way to everyone all the time, that will probably not work out well for you. Okay. So hopefully everybody understands. On the other extreme, if you behave like a pawn, like a teacher's pet, like a yes man or a yes woman or a woman, obviously that's not good either. You don't have your own thoughts and opinions. If you do, you never express them, right? You simply agree with whatever your boss says. One aspect of that, first of all, is why would they need you around if all you do is you parrot what they say, right? Now, you essentially become a worker. Like, workers are paid to do what they're told. Managers are paid to decide what's to be done, right? That's the big difference, right? So if you don't actually decide anything, you just sort of take your cue from whatever your boss says. That's what you think, right? Obviously, that's bad, right? If you take that to an extreme, that's going to blow up in your face. It's not going to work out. So it's a balancing act. Sometimes you need to keep it real. Sometimes you need to not argue with your boss and just toe a line, right? If you're going to be swimming uphill on something, there's no way you're going to win that issue. Sometimes you just need to go along with it. Now, this is assuming, of course, that it's not violating any kind of moral, ethical principles that you have to comply with, right? That's my assumption here. I'm not talking about going again, like doing something that's illegal or doing something that's a complete violation of your own personal values, so you can't live with yourself. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the day-to-day stuff that happens at work, right? Okay, so this is a real balancing act. Okay, now one of the realities is that if you are going to be promoted, if you're going to be hired or being put into a position where you're in charge of something, the person who puts you there, the decision maker, presumably your boss, okay, one element of hiring is that people tend to hire in their own image. It's very rare that you get someone who is hiring for an important position who chooses someone who disagrees with them on almost everything. That's very rare. I'm not going to say it never happens, but it's extremely rare. Usually the way things work is that, the big boss who is hiring a manager will tend to think favorably of candidates who are quite similar to them. They agree with their approach. They agree with their values, right? They might have the same communication style or personality. They might also have the same background. They came up and did the same jobs on the way up, right? I'm not saying that's necessarily the way it should be. I'm saying that that's what we usually see, okay? So if you want people to choose you, you can't disagree with them on pretty much everything and then tell them straight to their face all the time. Like, it just doesn't really work out like that. So realizing that is very important, okay? So it's a balancing act. Usually the way these things are done is if you're in a public situation, okay, this is something that's done in front of employees or, whatever, you need to toe the line, okay? If you publicly challenge your boss or something, it's usually not going to go well. However, behind closed doors, when you can speak freely, it's more of a private kind of exchange. Then that's the time to be a bit more honest and say, look, I'm sorry, I don't believe this is going to work. I think that we've made some false assumptions here. I think we're approaching this wrong, whatever it is. Now, assuming you know how to communicate this diplomatically so that people don't get insulted, because every single human being on the planet hates being told that you're wrong, right? You ever notice that? You hate being told you're wrong. Even when you're wrong, you hate being told that by somebody. It makes you really dislike that person, even if they're right. Even if you know that they're right, you hate hearing it, right? So this is where the communication skills come into play, right? So that's something that people need to gain a sense of awareness of. Okay, if you want to put yourself up to be in a management position, executive position, you need to understand that. You have to be very sensitive to these kind of things. Okay, so let's go over to the chat just briefly here. Helmina says, sorry, just joined the stream. I will check your other stuff. Thank you for answering my question. You're absolutely welcome, Helmina. I've been trying to network, but I got it. Yeah, okay. Revamping my resume ATM. Oh, like ATS or an ATM. Anyway, you're absolutely welcome. Zachariah, if I'm saying that right. I'm never saying anybody's name. Don't take it personally. I bastardize everyone's name. It's one of my big flaws. Does this work for HR people too? Like in my case, I had a master's degree in HR management and I barely have these interpersonal skills you talked about. Part of it was the business school fault. Yeah, part of it is, but a lot of it is learning this stuff in the real world. I mean, listen, that's been my experience. I mean, I have, for what it's worth, I have an engineering degree and an MBA. So I've studied the business theory, okay? Like I know the business theory. But most of what I'm talking to you about comes from real world experience, okay? It's hard to know how to interact with other people if you haven't been out interacting with other people. You also need to step outside of yourself to do this. You can't just do this little thing that you always do and feel comfortable with. You have to try other things. Usually a great way to do it is to try and research some kind of theory or principle and then go out and try and apply it when it comes to how to interact with people. At least that's been what I've done. I'm not purporting to be some big genius that knows the answer to everything, but that's how I've done it my whole career. I was interested in this stuff from the beginning. I was a bit unusual because I came up through operations. I was a detail-oriented, technically minded introvert. But unlike, I would guess, 90% of, technically minded, detail-oriented introverts, I actually was interested in learning this stuff. So I tried various things. I heard, like, this is how you do this and this is how you do that. How do you persuade someone? What does a salesperson actually do in their job? If you're working in different types of sales, what does someone who is a political campaign manager do, to try and make the population more amenable to voting for somebody, and then you hear bits of, information, you get some stuff back and you think like, okay, that seems kind of weird. So I would try it if I could. And some of it worked for me and some of it really didn't. So I just picked the stuff that worked and I just kept rolling with it and then for years and years and years, you tend to have a library of things that tends to work in different situations. So it's mainly outside of school in my experience anyway. And the only thing backing that up for me also is that, as I said, when I took an MBA, although they teach a course in organizational theory, sometimes called organizational behavior, which is a very cool thing to learn. It really explains how people behave in workplace situations and why, and how you can navigate that and make it work to your advantage. Not in a slimy way, but just in a sort of, I now know how to deal with people kind of way. They teach that, which is very useful, but it doesn't include stuff right down at the bottom, like how to actually have a conversation, how to phrase something. Like, it doesn't go down at that level. It's a bit above all that kind of stuff. Generally, I would say it doesn't work for HR, because this is not like, we're not talking about HR. We're talking about management. That's where you are in charge of people. So if we're talking about the position of director of HR, yes, it would apply. But to an HR employee, no. This is something that applies to managers, to people who are in charge of other people. That's what this is. Okay. The big part of it is my fault. I'm a shy introvert. I didn't do much help. That's absolutely not your fault. We're all born with certain characteristics, and it's what you do with them. You really don't have to be a raging extrovert to do this stuff. In fact, a lot of introverts can really kick ass when it comes to this stuff, because they have the ability to focus and the ability to learn facts. Like great swaths of facts of like what works and how you do it. They're very methodical, right? They're not trying to do 50 things at once and they're distracted. So, there's a lot of great things there. It's a skill like any other, So how do I develop these skills? Not for the sake of to get promoted. How do you develop them? Practice. Okay. That would be my recommendation. What I kind of just said. Do some research, figure out what is supposed to work, and then go out and try it. And then if it does show promise, try it again and try and incorporate it, right? I remember when I was very young, like when I was in my 20s or something, when I would talk to somebody, I'd have a problem for whatever reason looking them in the eyes. I'd look down or something. And I remember like that was an example of like I had heard from somewhere that, you look people in the eyes, it's a sign of confidence, and it's a sign that you're actually engaged with them. You actually care about what they're saying. You're not just daydreaming or kind of, you're just waiting for it to be over. You're listening and you're concentrating on them. So I forced myself to do that. Now, it's not that much of an accomplishment, but that's like just one thing of like hundreds. I'm looking down here because my screen is down here and my camera is up there, but there you go. But practice makes perfect. Okay. Nobody is really good when you start out. Excuse me. Nobody is born brilliant at stuff. Some people are blessed and they come close, but they're not born brilliant. It takes a bit of practice and a bit of discipline. And this is no different. But the good news is that this stuff is not as hard as probably a lot of other things you've had to do. Okay, what are we? This moved on me. Okay, but to get hired and succeed in HR position. Well, an HR position, generally, that doesn't apply to what we're talking. We're talking about management. So, if you have a desire to be the head of HR or something, or it's basically for positions where you have hiring and firing authority over people, and or you have, P&L responsibility for something, like you have to make money. So you're managing costs and you're managing revenue. Okay. That's what I'm talking about here. Okay. Let's see. Helmina, you answered that already, but thank you. I'm working on my resume, updating, modernizing, including keywords. Yes. I work 2 different side hustles now, but I want a stable, predictable part-time job for financial security, get my own well-being. I get depressed if I just stay home doing nothing. Yes. Well, I used to do a live stream called Side Hustle Ideas, and I may do it again. I enjoy talking about that stuff. I love entrepreneurship, and I love people who undertake side hustles because it's a very easy way to get into the world of business. You don't have to bet your life savings. You don't have to quit your job. You just, start a little thing on the side instead of sitting on your butt in front of the TV or whatever you do to relax. You cut that time in half and you use some of it to work on something, and you can make money. It can also be creatively satisfying. It's more security, and the big thing is that you learn so many skills doing it. You will learn so much more doing a side hustle, all things being equal, than like a lot of other things that you could do. I'll take one more question, then I'll get back to my topic here. Latasha, I guess Avery. Okay, Avery says, I was in operations and was promoted to manager. My biggest challenge was learning how to manage people. Didn't know the difference between doing the work versus getting the work done. Yes. Oh, I mean, I could talk. How much time do you have? I could talk about this stuff for weeks. Yes, first-time managers, there's a lot of things that you learn. First of all, it's very easy to deal with people and manage people who are just like you. That's not really a challenge, right? You just click. When you communicate with them, it's easy. When you tell them to do stuff, they do it, it's done. It's great, The challenge is in managing people who are not like you. And the reality is that there's many personality types out there, many different work styles, many different backgrounds, and you will be able to relate closer to some people than to others, or to relate better to some people than to others. So the challenge is being able to manage people who are not like you. They have a completely different communication style, completely different background, completely different work style, right? A lot of people who are less experienced and they get put into their first management role, they interpret that as like, oh, this is a bad employee, right? If you're not like exactly like me, then I interpret that as inferior. Everybody does this. Everybody. It's human nature. It's a real stretch to try and be able to step out of yourself and not make those assumptions. Now, I used to do this. I did this for like 10, 15 years at least. And until I got into a situation where I saw more of a business unit, I saw not just operations, but I saw marketing, I saw sales, I saw customer service, I saw different things. And a lot of the people that I kind of looked down on or didn't value very highly because they weren't like me, I really saw, like right in front of me, demonstrated with my own eyes, I saw how they used those traits that were not like me to absolutely crush it in things like customer service or things like sales, which were not my core competency, not my background. Anyway, I could go into all kinds of examples, but I mean, that's where I really learned. So like I developed a respect for people that had that skill and people that had that skill. Previously, I thought those were kind of silly. There's no reason, there's no situation where that would be helpful. But, oh my God, was I wrong? So that's how I, for myself, anyway, this is according to me, this is how I learned that, because I saw how valuable those things were. So I was a lot slower to judge people just because they weren't like me and they didn't communicate like me and they had different habits, like a lot of extroverts for a start. You're trying to do 50 things at once and you're all over the place. You're never in your office. You're all, flying around, talking to people, all this kind of stuff. I thought they were just lazy and they didn't want to work, but obviously they're not. But when you give them like sales type assignments, it's like, wow, that's what you need. They kicked ass. They beat out people like me, hands down. Same with customer service, the ability to take a lot of heat from people, in person or on the phone. If you're manning a counter and you get, an irate customer or something, they just took it all in their stride. It didn't faze them, but not by being jerks, but by being friendly. And they just, I couldn't do that. I get upset very easily. So I wouldn't work out. So anyway, that's how I did it. But when you're a first-time manager, a lot of people don't have that experience. So they kind of project onto other people like, you're not like me. So therefore, you have to be more like me because this is not working for you. And that's completely incorrect. I won't say it's always incorrect. Like there's just some incompetent people, occasionally you meet them, but assuming that about everyone who's not like you, that's false. Avery, I have time. Riddle time. I think a good way to learn is helping people that do internships that gave me a bit of experience in dealing with the trying to explain the important and less important things. Yeah, sure. Okay, so we talked about, we were talking about the third item that you need, in my experience, if you are wanting to be an executive manager. What are the required skills? The third skill was being politically aware, okay? When it's expected of you that you're going to toe the line, support your boss, support your superiors, support your organization, and when is the appropriate time and the appropriate way to be honest and keep it real and voice your concerns and communicate in a much more forthright kind of way. Okay, it's a bit of a balancing act, and having the awareness of when you do either of those is a necessary skill. Okay, also being able to recognize the political motives of others, right? There's countless examples of that. Everybody wants their suggestion to be the one that's chosen. They want their proposal to be the one that's adopted, right? It will give them some kind of power. They'll be regarded as an authority. They'll be regarded as, the best employee if it's their suggestion that the boss says that's the direction we're going to adopt, something like that. So people are very self-serving. So there's going to be all kinds of political stuff going on. They want you to assist them in getting their suggestion to be adopted, whatever, right? Right. They want to be more visible. They want to be the one that's seen as leading or, representing the organization or a person. There's countless examples, right? So there's all kinds of what I call office politics. It's just power dynamics going on, and being able to recognize those. Now, hopefully you're fortunate enough to not be in an environment where there's a lot of that stuff, because that can become the main focus. I'm sure a lot of you guys have been in situations where that stuff has been, the number one preoccupation and priority of everybody in the workplace, right? Especially if it's a kind of what you would now call a toxic place to be, right? Everyone has to have the appearance of working really hard and the appearance of being valuable. Fortunately, hopefully you're not in a situation where that's a huge thing, but it's always present in some amount, and just being aware of what people are doing, right? The other thing is that, how can I put this? When I started out, I try and keep it real. I have a very tough time going along and supporting something that I don't believe in. But the problem with that is that it makes it very hard to make friends, as it were, right? Because a big principle that you'll get in office politics is, you do me a favor, I'll do you a favor kind of thing. You support me, I'll support you. Right? So these kind of games go on. And sometimes, you want someone's support. So you're like, okay, if you help me with this, I will support you in your endeavor to do this other thing. Right? I won't compete with you in this. I'll just sort of concede this if you give me this, right? And in theory, everyone gets what they want. I get my thing, you get your thing. We're both happy. In reality, it's usually a lot messier than that. You have to compromise on certain things and agree to things that you don't want in order to get what you want. So, very messy. But being unaware that this is a thing that can really help. It's hard to succeed without doing at least some of that. That's what I found. Because if you want to be chosen for something, you want to be hired, you want to be promoted, that means they have to pick you. And in order for them to pick you, they have to like you. And in order for them to like you, they have to feel that you're on their side. This is what I've learned. Okay? It would be great if people just hired the most competent person for the job. That would be great. But if you hire the most competent person for the job and then they turn around and they sabotage something you're trying to do, that can be a bad experience for you if you're the boss. So it's understandable why, you know, some of these other principles are at play. Where did I leave off here? Avery says, yes, I didn't have the experience. Glad I found your channel. Yeah, well, Avery, no one has the experience at the beginning. Everyone starts from nothing, and then you go from there. And some people, they just find themselves a nice, comfortable sort of situation, and they just stay there, and they never really progress beyond it. And I'm not judging anyone. If that's what makes you happy, if that's what gives you a sense of comfort and familiarity, and you've got a good quality of life, and you're making money, and you're achieving your personal goals, hey, why not? Other people, you want more. If you've taken a lot of education and then you get a job, and your job it seems like this is unfulfilling because I'm using 1% of my education to do this job. Maybe you want to try and shoot for more. And I know what that feels like. I got a job where I was like one of the youngest people and one of the most educated people. I mean, not that I was that educated. I had like a bachelor degree, but I was still like one of the, I don't know, 10%, 5%, something like that, of people there that had a bachelor degree. I had managers 3 levels above me that didn't have any kind of university or any kind of college or anything. They just had high school. It's like our vice president of continuous improvement had high school. No offense to people who just have high school, but this person didn't strike me as particularly accomplished either, or smart. So it was kind of like just, they were hired because they were a friend of the boss kind of thing, I guess. That was my opinion. And I just felt like this is silly. I've been trained to do so much more than this. So, no one starts out with the experience, but some people have a desire to get it, and you want to jump to something else, if only for seeing other ways of doing things and learning new skills. I think that's great. I would much rather hire people that have jumped around than hire someone who's been in one place for 25 years. That's just me. Mickey9, it's disappointing, but I'm leaving a bit early today. See you again. I'll have a wonderful day. Not a problem, Mickey9. These things are up, so you don't have to, you can still watch them if it's not in real time. So just come back to my channel and go to the live tab. Okay, so we talked about interpersonal skills. We talked about image skills, okay? What I call image skills, representing your organization and yourself to stakeholders. We talked about being politically aware, some of the office politics and the power dynamics that occur. I want to talk about something called a T skill set, if you pronounce the word correctly. Maybe you're one of the people that intentionally doesn't. It makes life interesting. The idea is that it's like a T, right? You've got one area that you have depth of knowledge in. That's your background. But then, like the T, you have the bar across the top. You also have to have breadth in other areas. So, for example, I came up through operations, like I've said several times so far today. So I feel that I have a lot of depth of knowledge when it comes to operations. I feel I can really hold my own in that area. Things like sales, things like HR, things like marketing. I have less experience. I haven't worked in a marketing department as an employee. I haven't worked in the HR department as an employee. I haven't worked in different other areas like, for example, public relations. But I have some knowledge of them, and I have some skills in those areas, but it's not very depth. There's not a lot of depth there. Like, for example, doing a YouTube channel. I love using it as an example because it's like everything all in one head, right? You're producing videos, which is operations. You're trying to figure out who your audience is and what they want to hear, what kind of videos they want. That's marketing. You're trying to make titles and thumbnails and all this kind of stuff to attract people to watch your stuff. That's marketing, right? If I outsourced any part of what I do to an editor or somebody else, that would be the equivalent of HR. You're dealing with a contractor, right? Or an employee or something like that. So, you do everything yourself. You have to wear all these hats. And that's why I like entrepreneurship so much. I think that it's an incredible skill for people to have done something themselves, done some kind of business themselves. They become so much more valuable as an employee because all of a sudden they understand the importance of what they're doing and how it fits into the larger picture. And that's what managers see. They see the larger picture. So a lot of managers will value you more if you understand this. You're the type of employee that understands the context of the work you do, so you'll be able to make better decisions. Yeah. So having a T skill set. So if you are somebody that has a depth skill set, you say you're a developer, you know how to code. I get people on this channel talking to me about how they have gone to school to learn how to code, and then they've done stuff on their own to refine their skills and how to code. That's great. Okay, great. Now, if your goal is to sort of climb the ladder, you're going to have to develop skills more broadly. Okay, you've gone really deep in how to code. That's great. But now you're going to have to learn about business, learn about how to deal with other people, learn how to, create a product that's for an audience. So if you can create, I don't know, an app or a game or something, great. But just because you can write the code doesn't mean that you can make the decisions to create something that people will want and they will want to pay for, right? Learn the basics of accounting. You don't have to go super deep into accounting, but just the basics. Learn the basics of finance. All this kind of stuff. And these things will contribute to make you so much more valuable. Your decisions will be so much better as a developer if you know all those other areas. Okay. So very important. Don't just have skills in one area. You've got to have broad skill sets too. Okay. That will enable you to do this. If you don't have any broad skill sets, if you don't know anything about accounting, if you don't know anything about marketing, if you don't know anything about, HR, it's very hard to be an effective manager, certainly an executive manager. I'd say it's almost impossible. Okay, that's just the reality of it. And I mean, yes, I have a course that teaches you that. You can essentially learn everything that you would learn in an MBA, a 2-year university degree, for $100 in this course. The catch is that it's self-study. You read textbooks. I guide you through it, but you do the work. You do it entirely on your own terms, on your own schedule, all that kind of stuff. But that'll teach you that. I mean, it's not available exclusively there. You can go out and learn about business, but develop broad skill sets in different areas. Okay. That also allows you to bring something unique. Just going off topic for a second, a lot of people on this channel, in the context of a job interview, when they get asked, what's something that unique that you can bring to a job, right? Why should we hire you? What can you bring that nobody else can? The most obvious answer to that is my combination of skills. I've got a lot of skills in this one area, but I also have experience here, and here, and I have a particular passion for this here, so I know a lot about it. I can bring that unique combination. I've seen different ways of solving problems. I can bring all of those with me to help solve problems in this role. And I'm pretty much willing to guarantee that nobody else that you're talking to, any other candidate for this, has that combination, that unique combination of skills of learning and experience, right? That's the most obvious answer to that, right? People that can code, no offense to you, but there's hundreds of thousands of people that can do that. You're not unique. People that someone's been an HR employee, they've done recruitment and selection, no offense to you, but there's hundreds of thousands of people that can do that, right? Pick any occupation or any background. You're not unique. There's a lot of those, right? But what becomes a lot more rare is someone that can code, but also has a passion for marketing and also has spent time as an intern in a business where they saw a lot of the marketing operations. That's slightly more rare, right? Add to that the fact that they've also worked in this other industry. They worked in software, but they've also got experience in this other industry. That helps ground them a bit. you know? So there you go. Okay, I'm making very slow progress today. I apologize for that. So far, we've talked about interpersonal skills, image skills, being politically aware, having a T skill set. I've never stumbled over this word before. Maybe I'm getting old. Employee relations. If you guys have spent any time on the internet, which I'm sure you have, you've probably seen a lot of these altruistic sort of inspirational business quotes. A lot of people love to post them on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn much more than I'm on Facebook or Instagram or other social media. And it's just filled with people posting these really cool sounding pseudo philosophical kind of principles that are supposedly business principles. Usually about kindness and treating people fairly and all this kind of stuff. And I'm not knocking it like that. It's obviously your heart's in the right place. But what kind of I find silly a bit is, these things, they're you can't live your life according to this like inspirational quote that says, be nice to everybody and always, give people a chance. You just can't, because there's a flip side. It seems that way when you're an employee. When you're a boss, it's a little bit different, because you give people chances and they turn around and they abuse the privilege. You get burned. The other thing is that, contrary to what some people believe who have only ever been employees, a boss wants to pay you a lot of money. They want to pay you very well. If they had the budget to do it, they would pay you very well indeed. Because if you're paid very well, you will be motivated. You will be loyal. You will be, a hard worker because you're getting paid so much money, right? Your boss doesn't want you to be paid minimum wage, because that means you're going to be, you're not going to regard this job very highly. You're not going to value it. You're not going to listen. You're not going to do anything, lift a finger above and beyond the bare minimum. For most people, that's normal human behavior, right? If you're paid very little, generally speaking, you tend to get what you're paid. You tend to get what you pay for, right? So bosses would love to pay you a lot of money. I wish I could pay my employees $1 million a year. I really could, back when I was a manager. Because then they would work really hard and they would be very loyal and they would stay and they would really try their best. And you knew it, right? Because they were inspired to do it, right? The problem is that you can't. You would love to, but you can't. You just don't have the money to be able to pay everyone $1 million. You just don't. Now, we all know this, but hopefully you understand the principle of what I'm saying, right? So employee relations, okay? This is something that everyone needs to know. Now, if you want to inspire people to work for you, okay? I mean, yes, obviously, if you could give them a lot of money, that would be your preference, right? But something I've talked about extensively, something I've talked about on this channel a lot, is something that made a huge impression on me. And that was that I worked for a company many years ago. They were a smaller company. And they had some very, very inspirational people running that company. It was a small company. It was only like, I think when I started, it was like 50 employees. And it grew while I was there. But the bosses, there was like 3 people that ran that company, that owned it and ran it. They were awesome. They were the nicest people you could ever meet. They were inspirational to work for. They were people that I modeled my idea of what a leader is upon. They led from the front. That means they led by example. If they wanted you to come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, they would be in at 7:30 every morning without fail. They were that type of people. They were super nice to you. I remember like my first week or something, I worked there, and they give you, like, I had an office and a desk and everything. And I wanted a printer, much like this thing. In fact, this is very similar to the one that I'm going to be talking about. I said, can I get a printer for my desk? I know you guys have this central photocopier monstrosity. But I don't want to do that. I'd like my own printer in my office, like, and a scanner so I can do my own stuff. And I remember my boss saying, sure, no problem. Whatever you need, just go out and get it. Not a problem, And I remember being like, oh, that was easy, And that was their attitude. It wasn't like, well, we have to see if it's in the budget and nobody else has asked for their own printer. It was never anything like that. It was little things like that. And in that moment, I was sold. It's like, you got me. I'm going to work hard for you because this is cool. It was little things like this, right? Just being nice to people. If somebody has a request, it's really not that big of a deal. It's maybe not something that you would want, but they want it. It seems to be a big deal to them. If you can, just say yes. If there's no real reason to say no, other than like some kind of, abstract concept or something, or just I've never thought of that before, so no. I really learned a lot from these people. It was such a difference from what I'd seen before, which was like large multinational corporations, big enterprise mentality. We don't want to empower our employees. We want to do everything we can to disempower them. We don't want them making the decisions on their own, right? They need to follow the rules, follow the, directive, no exceptions, like very harsh kind of the way they treat you in large organizations. And this was such a difference to that. And I observed how they retained a lot of the top talent in my hometown, in this particular industry, even though they couldn't pay their employees as much as their competitors who were all multinational corporations, big enterprise. They had economies of scale. They could afford to pay people more. The problem is that these companies, they could pay a worker more to do the same thing that we were doing, but they treated you like crap. And at our company, you were a good, if you had been there for some time, they know you're a good worker. They trust you. They know that you're not going to abuse any privileges. You felt sick one morning, you called in sick, you called the boss, you said, I can't come into work, I feel really sick. The boss said, sure, not a problem. Take all the time you need. Come back when you're ready. Don't worry, we'll be fine, right? It was like, that was such a breath of fresh air. That's the reason employees stayed at that company, because they were treated like that. And, you do get a couple of bad apples, people that abuse the privilege, they take all this great treatment and then they slack off, right? So you get a couple of people like that. They usually didn't last long, but most of the workforce, like at least 90% of them, they stayed and they did a fantastic job. And in return, when the boss, would come to you at, 4 p.m. on a Friday when you're about to leave or something and say like, look, we're really in a tight spot. Can I get you to stay for like 3 or 4 hours this evening to just finish this job? Can I get you to stay? Would you be okay? Most people would be, sure, not a problem. You got it. Yeah, we'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. It worked beautifully. It was a beautiful way to do business, and you got happy employees. You got a successful company. Our customers were very happy with our performance. We had dedicated people. Awesome way to run a company. This is what I saw. So employee relations, it's a big part of it is just being nice to people. It really is. Depending on the industry you're in, sometimes in some industries, there's some real roadblocks to being able to do this because it gets completely abused all the time. But that's not the majority of industries. Most places they will, they'll respond to it very well. Let's see here. Avery, yes, accountability was also, is that where I left off? Yes, okay. Accountability was also a challenge as a manager, how to hold others accountable while also being responsible. Yeah, you really have to start by being nice. You just have to force yourself to be nice. Otherwise, you'll never break the cycle of like being a jerk to people and then having them be a bad employee for you. And then it just feeds. It's a self-propagating cycle. Riddle Time says, if you pay someone $1 million a month, you won't see them again after 2 and 3 months. Now they can stop working. Yeah, and then you fire them, and then you cancel their pay. So that doesn't really work out. But hopefully you understand what I meant. I don't mean literally $1 million a month. And I didn't say $1 million a month. I think I said $1 million a year. But whatever. Bad Shoe says, hi, Bill. I was recently accepted into an MBA program. I'm trying to secure company sponsorship through my corporation, which was bought out by a mega corp. My corp doesn't display a positive sentiment. Yeah, most of them don't. And it's that generally works against the advantage they have, which is economies of scale. It's usually that and political risk, that undermines their advantage. That's why a lot of small companies have an advantage. You can treat people like family, like you actually care about them, right? And you trust them with more. You can do that at smaller companies. It's a lot easier to do. Obviously there's a lot of exceptions, but generally speaking, you can do it. A lot of large enterprise are run by people, like I was saying earlier, they have never had the experience of running an actual business unit and self-contained business unit. So therefore, they don't develop a lot of these skills, and they do a terrible job, and it manifests itself like this. They spend so much money on hiring people when at the same time, they also do their best to drive people away by treating them like crap. So, they're shooting themselves in the foot. So you always have to keep hiring more people, right? You also have to pay them a premium to stay there because it's a bad company, right? I've seen that where, you'd have to pay your workforce a 20% premium over your competitors because everyone knows that company treats you like crap. And everyone there is miserable. In that way, you can directly put a value on people being nice to each other and treating people fairly. And you could say it's costing us X amount per year, this many million, just because we're not nice to our employees. We had this amount of people leave this year. We figure 50% of those could have been avoided. They didn't leave because they relocated. As far as we know, a lot of them left just because they wanted another job. Okay, so that wasn't really a question, I don't think. Should I try reaching out to a megacorp HR we haven't? No. Don't try and reach out to HR, especially in a big company. HR is not, they don't want you to reach out to them. They want you to follow their procedure, which is they post a job and then you apply and then they tell you what to do. And they herd you in like cattle. That's what they want, right? Now, we're talking about, in this live stream, executive management. We're talking about upper management. Those jobs, like 95 to 98% of them, you don't hire people through that method. You don't post a job for a division of, whatever company and, and then have people apply for it and have them talk to a 21-year-old recruiter that says, tell me about yourself and, what does success look like to you? It's like, no, that's not how those are hired. Those are hired through networking, right? They're hired by, I did a whole live stream. I think it was the last live stream 2 weeks ago. We talked about that, right? No, don't reach out to HR because what they will do is they will just refer you to their standard process. They'll say, go look at our website, look at our job postings, and then apply through standard channels for those, right? That's usually what they'll do. You don't reach out to HR people. It's like reaching out to any other type of worker at the company. Do you reach out to the operations people? Like if you wanted to contact Amazon, do you reach out to the truck driver? No. That's like reaching out to an HR employee because they don't have the power to do anything, nor is it their job to really take unsolicited queries from the public. If they are in recruitment and selection, they have a process and they'll just refer you to their process or they'll just incorporate you into it. right? That's not what you want. Okay, so like I've said earlier, in the description box to this video, I put some links to some videos I've done that talk about specific things. There's one in particular called How Successful People Get Jobs. Follow the link to that video if you want to see what I do recommend. It's that type of thing that you might want to learn about and get into, because that's the way to get, higher level jobs. That's usually how it goes. I'm thinking I'd have better chances in securing funding. Oh, this is for your MBA program. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant like you wanted a job, so you're going to reach out to HR. Well, listen, if it's part of a big corporation, they will have an internal policy on that. Usually they'll have a policy written about, the company financing or subsidizing worker education if you take a program. Presumably they'll have a policy and rule on that and a process that you go through. So you would just call them and ask them for information on that. It's probably on their website somewhere or their internal website, and just go through that procedure. That's usually how you do it. Riddle time. Is what you're saying pretty much that the behavior of management also reflects back to how customers might be treated? Yes, maybe not directly, but yes, there's, like, for example, it's rare that you get, an executive management committee of a company. And I'm talking about a private company, because a publicly traded company, it's completely different. You're not in charge. The shareholders are really in charge, or at least their board is in charge. And if you have someone who owns the company, who believes very strongly in treating people very well, it's very rare that you would see that company then be known for treating people like crap. You know what I mean? Obviously there's exceptions, but generally that's not what we see. If you found a company in your image, like for example, I'm not an expert on this, but Jeff Bezos, whatever his name is, that founded Amazon, he had very strong opinions about the quality of the customer experience, right? And I would argue that, as far as I can tell, he built that company based on that principle. That was probably the single biggest approach or policy that he had that led to its success. He was at the right place at the right time with the right product for the right market, okay? But a big deal of why Amazon grew much more than anyone else was because what distinguished Amazon was that they really cared about the customer experience. If you had a problem with their product, it didn't arrive, or it arrived smashed or something, and you said, it arrived smashed or it didn't arrive, they would just, okay, no problem. We'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. You don't have to pay anything. We believe you. We'll send you another one. Whatever it was, right? Like, it was just quite incredible for the time, considering what players had been in that space up till then. Right. So, this is neither here nor there, but it's rare that you get, someone who's really in control of a company that's got very strong feelings about how customers should be treated or how employees should be treated, and then you turn around and you see them doing the opposite. It's very rare. But publicly traded companies are different. It doesn't really matter what the CEO wants, and I speak from experience here, because you just have to do what makes the most money. And if you say, I believe that a policy of giving people the benefit of the doubt and treating them well will be the best policy financially over the long term, you are going to be immediately challenged on that and say, well, show me the proof. Show me the proof that is the right way to go. I don't want you to go down this path, and then 5 years later, as we find that we're not as profitable as we used to be. So you better do a good job of convincing me with numbers that this is going to actually be the case. It's very hard. If they don't trust you, it's pretty much impossible to convince them on something like that. Okay, the only time you can really see it done is if the person who's running the company, who controls it, can say, we're doing it this way, period, right? That's the only time you can really force that. You're welcome, Bad Shoe. Apologize. Text line on YouTube isn't the best. Yes, I'm sorry. I know I've had some problems with the with YouTube filtering out some of the comments and things. I've made some changes on the back end. Like I've just basically took a lot of the protections and stuff off, and that seems to have helped a bit. So there you go. Okay, I want to try and finish this here. We talked about we're talking about required skills for executive managers. We talked about interpersonal skills, image skills, being politically aware, having a T skill set. We've talked about employee relations, okay? Being a good boss, but getting productivity. Okay, this next one, I don't know what you call this stuff. These are all tips and tricks I've picked up from reality, not from books. And that is just developing, I don't know, for want of a better word, maturity. Okay, what I mean by this is when people are young, and God knows this describes me, you know, what's the thing you do when you're young? You look at the world and you say, oh my God, these people are stupid. Why are they doing things this way? It doesn't make any sense. You know, once they realize that all of that is wrong and you just throw it all out and replace it with this thing that I've dreamed up, then it will work, right? And it will work much better. Believe me, because I know, right? And you always have this debate going on your entire life. You can call it like right wing, left wing, you know, conservative, liberal, right? Most people would be somewhere in the middle. There's obviously some value to learning if you have a lot of experience and you've seen a lot of different things tried and you've seen things that consistently work and things that consistently don't. Obviously, that counts for something, right? Okay. But on the other hand, just going back to what's been done in the past is not always the solution. The world is moving forward, not backwards. There are new ideas, new ways of doing things. This is what I think is so exciting about business and technology and how they combine. You know, the latest thing with AI, you know, is just the latest in a long line of innovations that have been truly disruptive. I think it's great. You know, there's obviously friction, but you always get friction whenever there's an innovative new thing. When they invented automobiles, when they invented cars, the same thing happened. It was disruptive. Some people were put out of a job. If you took care of horses and knew everything there was about horses, like animal husbandry, whatever you call it, this was bad for you because people were moving away from horses as the means of transportation to the internal combustion engine, right? But I think that most people will agree it's better now that we've had the internal combustion engine. I mean, yes, I know the obvious thing is like, you know, the environmental impact, but you know what I'm saying? In terms of business, is a good thing. And if you can get a clean internal combustion engine or some new version of it that is clean, then obviously it's hands down an improvement. I think most people would agree. It's better that we have an internet than no internet. Right? Yes, there are some bad things that come with the internet, but there were some bad things we had before too. It's also solved a hell of a lot of problems and improved a lot of people's lives. So, you know what I mean? So you always get this sort of tug of war, you know? Do we look to past experience to guide us, or do we look to imagining what new thing we could do? Right? Now, everybody's got an opinion on this. This is the thing, okay? Including a lot of people that have never done anything. And we all have to start somewhere. God knows I did. But I did quite a few entrepreneurial efforts, as a lot of some of you guys have. You know, and that really informs you of like, you know, okay, when imagining something new will work and when it doesn't, you know, how often does that happen? Right? If you never try, you don't know. But the people who have tried, you know that a lot of new ideas don't work, or at least they don't work in the form that, you know, you're able to do them. The idea might have potential, but it's the execution that kills a lot of things. So, and if you look at a lot of entrepreneurial ventures, 90% of them fail almost immediately, right? Now, if you do it right, it's fine. You just dust yourself off, no harm done, you try again. You didn't bet your entire life savings, you didn't bet your entire future on it, you're fine. You know, if you do it right. You try one idea, it doesn't work out. If you keep trying it, you'll eventually stumble on something that does work, and it can work big time. But in order to be at this level, usually a requirement is a certain amount of maturity, which means that you've also got to go look at the data. You've got to look at the wealth of experience and knowledge that we've amassed to try and see if something is likely to work or not. Okay? You can't become too conservative, but you got to be a little conservative. Okay? Usually a nice, healthy mix is a winning combination. You know, it's like, I believe in the future, I believe in envisioning something, but I want to see evidence. I'm not going to spend millions of dollars just on somebody's pipe dream. I want to see some kind of proof, some tangible proof that's objective that this is going to work. So go out and get me some proof. When you've gotten me some proof, then we'll take the next step. This kind of thinking, right? Okay, so I don't know how to express this better than what I'm doing now, but just, having that, I don't know if you want to call it wisdom, but just having that mentality. That usually is there for a reason. And think of this, when people point out examples of visionaries who have rolled the dice and taken a chance on something really bold, and something that is really innovative that hasn't existed before, and it's paid off big time. Look and you will see that is usually a wild exception. It's an outlying point. Come back to me with data on what usually happens when you take that approach, and you will see that usually the answer is absolute failure, right? So this is why you've got to have a nice balance, right? Okay, so those are the standard things that I would say. Okay, I feel pretty confident about all of those. I've embodied a lot of those. So as far as I'm concerned, that's what you need. There's a couple of things that I'm less sure about. They're more of my just opinion. I was going to share those with you guys if you are interested. I see there are 28 people here. The first one is kind of what I touched on already. It's that entrepreneurial experience of some kind is going to be extremely valuable to teach you how to be a manager, how to be in charge of something, okay? Because if you've tried to build something yourself, you've tried making money at something, usually something that's your vision. You could have like a lawn mowing business, something absolutely basic. You could say, I've got a vision that I'm going to make money by mowing lawns, and I'm going to tell people about it by going door to door in my neighborhood. If I live in a neighborhood where there's houses that have lawns, and I'm going to go knock on the door and I'm going to give them this pamphlet. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm going to be super friendly. And this is what I'm going to say to them. And this is how much I'm going to charge. And this is how I'm going to do it. And this is where I'm going to get my equipment from. And this is when I'm going to do it. And this is all my vision. I've created this. Okay. And I believe it's going to work, but let's try it. And you've actually pulled the trigger on something like that. Even if you were unsuccessful, okay, even if you were unsuccessful, I would say you are far more qualified to be a manager, generally speaking, than someone who has never attempted anything like this. I don't care if you have a PhD. Okay, I don't care if you're a member of Mensa, you're like highly intelligent. If you've never done anything like this, I don't think you're going to be a super amazing manager. I wouldn't bet on it. You could be, but it's not a sure thing. I think someone who has that kind of experience is far more likely to be a great manager, to understand, to be able to make quality decisions. They understand the importance of each of the different areas. They understand how they all work together and fit in, and how they're all valuable, necessary, and needed. Okay, so that's what I would say. Entrepreneurial experience. It's even better if you've done several things, you've failed some of the time, and then you've found success. That's even better. For some people, that's a tall order. That doesn't happen to everyone. But if you at least tried, that's definitely an entire skill set that a lot of people don't have. And it's something you could gain in 3 months. You try something. You honestly try it and do it. You will gain an appreciation for so many things. Okay, let's talk about 2 more things. The first one is leadership style. Sometimes if you go to a job interview, they ask you, what's your leadership style? Have you ever been asked that? Everyone loves that question. There's many different ways to direct people or to try and influence people. Okay. And I did a video a long time ago where I gave you sort of my recommended answer on, or at least if I was asked that question, what I would say. And I basically think that there's, at the core of it, there's 4 types of leadership. There's autocratic, like military style leadership where you just order people around. There's delegative, where you say, I'm going to give this to you, you handle it. If you run into issues, come and let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that it's going smoothly and that it will be finished by this date. Take care of it. That's where you tend to trust people more. Okay. And then you work on coordinating things rather than micromanaging things. Okay. There's a participative leadership style. That's where you get everyone. I meant to say collaborative. Collaborative is like where you get everyone. You go and you talk to people and you say, look, you're the expert on this. You're the one that's running the operations department. I think we should do something like this, but what do you think? And you kind of work it out with them, and then you make a decision, right? And participative is very similar, except that instead of talking to people one-on-one, you talk to everyone, okay? And it becomes like a almost decision by committee, right? Everybody has their say, everybody's involved, right? Now, obviously, each of these has pros and cons. You would not exclusively use any of these methods to make all your decisions. You mix it up. Certain decisions, you got to behave like a general. You come in and say, this is what we're doing. I don't want to hear any argument. I don't want to hear any pushback. From this moment on, this is what we're doing. Go, you know? Other times, obviously, that's not the way to do things. You would want to work with people more. You would want to do a participative thing, make everyone feel heard, especially if it's a very complex decision. Everyone should be involved, at least all the heads of department or, you know, all the managers or whatever your hierarchy is. You know, but obviously that's not the way to make a lot of decisions, right? That would be how you make certain decisions, but you can't do everything like that. And it's bad to do everything like that. You don't want a decision by committee for everything. Collaborative is really good. That's probably the one that you would be your default, right? Where if you have to make a decision about a certain thing, you go and you talk to the person that's most skilled in that area. You kind of have a conversation, you get their input, and then you make a decision, right? So you would not have any one particular leadership style. You would be able to do all of these as the situation dictated, right? There are pros and cons to each, and that's what you have to do. You have the confidence to be able to get up and make a decision and stick by it. Some people don't have that. You also need to have the skills to be able to involve everyone and do it in such a way that it makes sense. Everybody feels heard. Everybody has contributed. You've had a chance for, especially things that they have a mesh relationship between different people. You know, something that someone does affects everyone else and vice versa, right? So you would have to be able to get them to hammer out all the details and work together. And what you do is you facilitate that and make sure that you're pulling together to try and work it out rather than just infighting and bickering, right? That requires a lot of diplomatic skills, you know, and people management skills. So, I mean, you have to be able to do all of these. And if you can do these and recognize what situation that you need to do these in, you will go far. Okay, so that's what I would say. Now, this is only based on my opinion and my personal experiences. I haven't heard that echoed out in the real world. That's just something I'm saying. Everything else that I've said today is stuff that I've heard echoed by other people. This is one that is just more from me. And then the final thing I will say, this is the last of these required skills. This one is also just my opinion, is people management skills for organizational decision making. Okay. This is where, how can I put this? This is an interesting topic. I taught a course on this in university several years ago, where how often have you seen this? Somebody up top says, we're going to do this, right? And maybe you're an employee of that company and you are not at the top. You're somewhere in the middle or you're down at the bottom, especially if you're down at the bottom and you hear that the CEO or whatever just said, we're going to do this. And the first thing that comes across your mind is, oh my God, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It is not going to work. I feel as sure as I'm sure that I'm alive, that is not going to work, because I can tell you exactly what's going to happen, at least in my little area. This is what's going to happen. First, this is going to go wrong. Then people are going to be confused. Then we won't get a solution on how to fix the thing that's gone wrong. Then we'll be ordered just to get on with it, and we can't because we don't have the right tools, and then it will fail. Now, what happens? And they've actually done a study on this. They found that, I can't remember what the number was. It was something like 90%. 90% of the time when a corporate initiative has failed, 90% of the time, the people in the organization down at the bottom, they already knew it would fail. They already knew exactly how it would fail and why. They already could predict exactly what was going to happen that led to its failure. But they were not listened to. That information was never taken into account. It never sort of percolated up the organization, as I hit my monitor, to the decision-making process at the top. That was never incorporated. Even though people within the organization already knew exactly what the problems were and what they were going to encounter and possibly how to fix them, right? So as someone in charge, you also have to take this into account. You have to come to grips with this process. It's very easy to just order people around and say, we're going to be doing this. I want everyone to do this so that we achieve this goal. And everybody around you is saying, I don't think we can do that for this reason. And you say, shut up. I don't want to hear it. Just do it. Get on with it. Right? And then what happens? Exactly what they said happened, and it failed. For the reasons they said. They tried to alert you to it, but you wouldn't listen, right? Now, whether it's you making the decision or some kind of committee, okay? Same thing. So the terms that I've heard out in the world for this stuff is top-down decision-making, okay? And bottom-up sort of decision-making, where the people at the bottom, they're giving you feedback and they're saying, this is what's going to happen if we do this, okay? Which is the reality check for your corporate initiative. And so the management jargon is, we're going to stitch together a shared perspective from the top and the bottom, and they call that middle out management, where you have your direction coming down from the top, you have your sort of feedback and reality check coming up from the bottom, and then in the middle, that's where a lot of the middle managers have to sort of try and balance the two and try and create a combined plan that will lead to success, right? Now, as the person in charge, basically what you have to do is you got to do two things. You've got to coordinate all this, and you have to put incentives in place for people to do this stuff so that they are rewarded if they bring up objections. But yet, you can't just complain. You have to actually overcome the objections. You have to come up with a plan that is doable and you achieve it, right? So you've got to put all the incentives in place where people get paid or people get privileges or people get rewarded or recognized for doing certain things. And you got to make sure that those things lead to success, right? So that's what I would say. So I don't know what you call that, right? You could call it organizational decision-making, making sure that the people that are making decisions on what to do, how we should do things, that they are correct. They lead to the plan working. Riddle Time says, for me, I was always software development. I always had my personal projects. Now with For example, an open source project, there are contributors which I have to guide, helps to learn too. Okay, good. Bad Shoe, what are the best ways to identify this from a worker's perspective to take advantage of it? Are you talking about the last thing that I just mentioned? Like saying, are there any good strategies? I.e., stand out from the rest without stepping on too many toes. Sorry, I talked about a couple of different things, so I'm not sure about the context. So workers' perspective to take advantage of it. Well, I'm mainly talking about management here, so it's not really the workers' perspective. Workers do what they're told, and I mean, if you're given stupid instructions, they order you to do the impossible. It's like it's going to result in failure, right? You know, this is the thing. If you are a manager or a supervisor, those of you who've been supervisors, you know this. If you ask employees, you know, are you working your hardest? Could you possibly be working any harder, right? You know, they're going to say, yeah, we're working flat out. And no, we couldn't work any harder. And yes, this is the best way of doing things, right? This is the problem. This is where it requires a really good relationship with your workers. And there has to be incentives in the right place, right? So if you say like, look, I'm going to give out performance pay. So if we meet this goal that the bosses are telling the workers to do, everyone gets a reward, right? So you make the workers want to accomplish the goal, right? So you've got to do that first. If they're just paid by the hour, they're not going to do anything extra really, because like what's the incentive for them? Nothing. You work harder and you still get paid the same. Like what's the incentive? So your job is to design the incentive structure so that people support your goals. Now sometimes your hands are tied, or at least they're partly tied. Other times they aren't. That's why it's great to do this in a small company, because you can you have more control over designing the incentives, right? Incentives can be anything from like bonus pay to I will buy us all pizza for lunch. You know, I mean, it could be anything in between. So it's figuring out what the incentives should be and then how to implement those. And then it has to be stuff that people actually care about. It can't be some BS thing that that's what they do in big companies. They give out incentives that they think are incentives, but nobody gives a rat's ass about. You know, let's be honest. So it fails as an incentive. It's usually done because the people that are in charge of this stuff have no power. They don't have the authority to create their own compensation structure or something in their little division. Right? So you have to rely on other things. And we talked earlier in this stream about some of the little things you can do, just being nice to people and stuff, and giving them little privileges and things like this. That goes a long way with some people. If you do your research and you ask them, like, what do you guys want? Are there any good strategies? Of course there are. I mean, that's a whole topic in itself. I've actually talked about that in the past. The number one strategy that leads to financial success is quality. Whatever you do, make sure that you're doing a damn good job. And it's a damn good job in a very specific way. It's a way that your customers perceive you. And the easiest way to do that is to go to one of your customers and say, look, write down in order the best companies that do this. So if I said like restaurants, write down your top 10 in order. So number one is the best. Would you put McDonald's? Would you put Burger King? Would you put, I don't know, Denny's? I don't know. What's the order for you, right? So this has its own criteria built in, right? Whatever you consider important, you're judging these players by, the criteria that you consider important, right? So what's the best cell phone? What's the best smartphone? Write down in order, Is it like Apple first, Samsung, Google? I don't know. What would be the order? Now, you do that. That's like the survey you give to your customers. And or you ask people, and if you don't score number one, figure out why you're not scoring number one. Is it a perception thing? Or is it a legitimate issue with your product or service? Or is it your price? Or is it something else? Maybe it's public relations. Maybe, people perceive you as an evil company or something. Like, I don't know. But whatever the issue is, then try to get to be number one, so that when you ask your customers, which is the best, you get to be number one. What they found is that that will determine how much money you make. I know that sounds self-evident, but it's actually a lot more revealing than you think, because most companies don't get this. And in the United States, Boston Consulting Group has been making millions, hundreds of millions for many years, basically consulting and telling clients essentially this, with a few bells and whistles on. Get back to quality. Don't make decisions because, we can cut costs this way. No. Don't make decisions because it's easier to do it this way. No. Make decisions based on what will increase our standing in that poll. So better quality product, better perception, that kind of stuff. And you will win if you do that. Even on a very small scale. Even if you're doing a startup, you will win. Yeah. Riddle Time says, how does your SWOT analysis look like? Yeah, that's more management BS. Like, I've never seen a SWOT analysis do any good, because you could put anything on them. What are your strengths? Well, we do this. Okay. Like, you don't know if that is just pure BS, or it doesn't matter at all, or it does carry a lot of weight. There's no numbers. There's no, and you know what I mean? If you guess wrong, you can't detect it on a SWOT analysis, right? So anyway, I was going to say, if you don't know what a SWOT analysis, look it up, but don't bother. It's not important. They don't really do any good. They're just things that appear to be an intelligent discussion about something, but it's really like just the absolute basics. So anyway. Okay, that's pretty much all I had to say about this. There's 28 of you guys here. I'm so surprised. I feel like today I just rambled. And I didn't do a super great job of expressing things, but hopefully you got something out of this. If you have any suggestions for topics you'd like me to cover under the umbrella of leadership and management, if there's any specific topics, let me know what those are. I generally try and speak to what people are interested in, if I can. And let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments in the video. And thank you so much for being here. You guys are awesome. And as I said before, you're doubly awesome if you're here for self-improvement. You keep trying to learn everything you can and putting things into practice. Try and practice as much as you can. And you will end up on top. It might take you a little bit of time, but time is going to pass one way or another, whether you're improving yourself or not improving yourself. It's going to pass. You're going to turn around. It's going to be 2 years later, 3 years later, 5 years later. You could really develop some skills. So thank you for your attention. I will see you guys on my next live stream Monday, where we're going to be talking more about job interviews and regular careers and that kind of stuff. We will do another one of these in 2 weeks. Thanks so much. Take care.